The moment I walked into that modeling agency, humiliated and desperate after my husband abandoned me for another woman, the head designer pointed at a broom and said even that was prettier than me, but 3 seconds later, the director made me her replacement, and everything changed. My name is Sarah Mitchell, I'm 32 years old, and 2 months ago my entire world collapsed in the span of a single morning. I woke up to find a note on the kitchen counter where my husband David used to leave his coffee mug every day for 7 years. The note was short, brutally efficient, just like everything David did when he wanted to avoid confrontation. It said he was leaving, that he'd met someone else, someone who made him feel alive again, someone who understood his dreams better than I ever could. He took the joint savings account, maxed out our credit cards, and disappeared with a 24-year-old assistant from his advertising firm named Melissa. I stood in our kitchen in downtown Seattle, rain hammering against the windows, holding that piece of paper with trembling hands, and I couldn't breathe. The apartment suddenly felt enormous and suffocating at the same time, every corner filled with memories that now felt like lies. I need you to understand something before this story goes any further. I wasn't some naive woman who ignored the warning signs. David and I had been struggling for years. We'd gone to counseling, we'd tried date nights, we'd had those 3 in the morning conversations where you're both crying and promising to do better. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became roommates who occasionally had uncomfortable conversations about bills and whose turn it was to buy groceries. I had invested everything into making our marriage work. I had given up my career in graphic design to support his climb up the corporate ladder, moved 3 times in 5 years to follow his job opportunities, and slowly, without even realizing it, I had erased myself to make more room for him. So when he left, I didn't just lose a husband. I lost my identity, my financial security, and any clear sense of who I was supposed to be without him. The first week after he left was a blur of phone calls and panic attacks. I called my parents in Ohio, hoping they could help me get back on my feet, but my father had just been laid off from the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 30 years, and my mother's part-time job at the library barely covered their own expenses. My younger sister Rachel was drowning in student loan debt from veterinary school, and my older brother Marcus had 3 kids and a mortgage he could barely afford. Everyone in my family wanted to help, but wanting and being able to are 2 completely different things. I heard the guilt in their voices when they told me they couldn't send money, and that guilt made everything worse because I didn't want to be another burden they had to carry. If you're listening to this and thinking about subscribing to the channel, please do it now. We're working toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support really means everything to us. Just click that subscribe button and join this community of people who appreciate real stories about real struggles. I spent the next 3 weeks applying for jobs, any jobs, everything from administrative assistant positions to barista work at coffee shops. But the economy was terrible, Seattle's cost of living was crushing, and I had a 7-year gap in my resume that made employers look at me like I was radioactive. Every rejection email felt like another confirmation that I was worthless, that David had been right to leave, that I had nothing valuable to offer the world. I was 2 weeks away from being evicted from our apartment because I couldn't pay the rent alone, and I was starting to seriously consider moving into my car, which would have been humiliating, but at least it would have been shelter. Then one afternoon, I was walking through Pike Place Market, trying to distract myself from the crushing anxiety that had become my constant companion, when I saw a flyer taped to a telephone pole. It was for an open casting call at Meridian Models, a modeling agency I'd vaguely heard of, one of those mid-tier places that handled commercial work and catalog shoots for regional retailers. The flyer said they were looking for diverse faces and body types for an upcoming campaign, and that experience wasn't necessary. I stared at that flyer for probably 10 minutes, rain soaking through my jacket, people jostling past me on the crowded sidewalk. I'm 5'6". I have curves that fashion magazines would call plus size, even though I'm perfectly healthy, and I have the kind of face that people describe as interesting rather than beautiful, which is just a polite way of saying I'm not conventionally attractive. But I was desperate, and desperate people do things they would never normally consider. So the next morning, I put on the one professional dress I owned that still fit properly, did my makeup as carefully as I could with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and took 2 buses across the city to the address on the flyer. The agency was in a converted warehouse in the Soto district, one of those industrial areas that was slowly being gentrified by tech companies and art galleries. The building had exposed brick walls and huge windows that let in gray Seattle light, and when I walked through the glass doors into the reception area, I felt completely out of place among all the impossibly tall, impossibly thin young people scattered around on modern furniture, scrolling through their phones with a kind of bored confidence that comes from being told your entire life that you're beautiful. The receptionist, a young man with perfectly sculpted eyebrows and a nose ring, barely looked up from his computer when I approached the desk. I told him I was there for the open call, and he gestured vaguely toward a hallway without saying a word. I followed the hallway to a large studio space where maybe 30 other people were waiting, sitting on folding chairs or standing in clusters, and I immediately felt like I'd made a terrible mistake. Everyone else looked like they belonged there. They had portfolios and comp cards, and that indefinable quality that makes certain people stand out in any room. I was wearing department store clothes and drugstore makeup, and my hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail because I couldn't afford a haircut. Before you continue with this story, if you haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to click that subscribe button. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and you can help us get there. It really does make a difference. A woman with a clipboard emerged from an office at the far end of the studio and started calling names. One by one, people disappeared into the office and came out 5 or 10 minutes later, some looking pleased, others looking devastated. The whole process felt like a particularly cruel version of American Idol, where your worth as a human being was determined in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. When the woman called my name, my legs barely supported me as I walked across the studio, aware that everyone was watching, judging, comparing themselves to me, and probably feeling relieved that they weren't me. The office was dominated by a huge desk covered in photographs and fabric swatches, and behind that desk sat a woman who I would later learn was Victoria Chen, the head designer and creative director for most of Meridian's major campaigns. She was probably in her early 40s, absolutely stunning in that intimidating way that some women manage effortlessly, wearing all black with statement jewelry that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be. She looked up when I entered, and I watched her expression change from neutral to something that might have been disappointment or disgust. I couldn't tell which. Victoria gestured for me to stand in the middle of the room, and I did, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. She got up from behind the desk and walked a slow circle around me, not saying anything, just examining me from every angle. The silence was worse than any criticism could have been. Finally, she returned to her desk, leaned back in her chair, and crossed her arms. What happened next is something I will remember for the rest of my life. Every word burned into my memory like a brand. Victoria looked at me with something that resembled pity mixed with contempt, and then she laughed. It wasn't a small laugh or a polite chuckle. It was a loud, genuine laugh that seemed to fill the entire office. Then she raised her voice, making sure everyone in the studio outside could hear her, and she said, "Even the brooms are prettier than you. Get out of here." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face go hot, felt tears starting to form in my eyes, and I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and cease to exist. Through the office doorway, I could hear people in the studio laughing, not even trying to hide it. Some of them had their phones out, probably recording my humiliation to share with their friends later. Victoria was still laughing, leaning back in her chair like she'd just told the funniest joke in the world, and I stood there frozen, unable to move or speak or do anything except absorb the full weight of my own inadequacy. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 30, time had stopped making sense. But then I heard the main door to the studio open, and the laughter cut off abruptly, replaced by a sudden tense silence. I turned slightly and saw a woman walking through the studio, and everyone seemed to shrink back as she passed. She was probably in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe bob and the kind of presence that makes you stand up straighter without even thinking about it. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit that was clearly custom-made, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had built something from nothing and wasn't about to let anyone tear it down. This was Elena Marsh, the founder and director of Meridian Models, though I didn't know that yet. She walked straight into Victoria's office without knocking, and her eyes moved from Victoria, who had stopped laughing but still had a smirk on her face, to me, standing in the middle of the room, probably looking like I was about to cry, which I was. Elena didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, really looked at me, not the way Victoria had looked at me like I was a disappointing product, but the way you look at a person when you're trying to understand something important. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more stories like this, please hit that subscribe button. Your subscription helps us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and it tells us that you value this content. It takes just 1 second, and it means the world to us. Elena walked a slow circle around me, just like Victoria had done, but it felt completely different. She was studying me, considering something, and when she completed the circle, she nodded to herself like she'd just confirmed a hypothesis. Then she turned to Victoria, and her voice was cold and precise when she spoke. "Victoria, pack your things. You're no longer the head designer here." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone within earshot. Victoria's face went white, then red, and she started to stammer something about contracts and creative vision, but Elena held up one hand, and the sputtering stopped immediately. Then Elena turned to me, and what she said next changed my entire life. "Tomorrow, you start working as the head designer." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the rain against the windows, could hear someone's phone buzzing in the studio outside, could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe to ask if she was joking, maybe to explain that I had no experience in fashion design, but Elena spoke first. "You have a quality that can't be taught," she said, her voice steady and measured. "You have what I call authentic presence. When you walked in here, I saw someone who has lived a real life, someone who understands struggle and disappointment and resilience. Fashion isn't just about beauty, though Victoria never understood that. It's about story. It's about connecting with real people who buy real clothes to live real lives. Every campaign we've run for the past 3 years has been technically perfect and completely forgettable because Victoria designs for other designers, not for actual human beings. You understand something she never will. You understand what it's like to be invisible, to be overlooked, to be told you're not enough. That understanding is worth more than 10 years of design school." I finally found my voice, though it came out shaky and uncertain. "But I'm not a fashion designer. I don't know anything about this industry. I studied graphic design in college, but that was over a decade ago, and I never really used it professionally." Elena smiled, and it was a genuine smile, not the cold professional expression I'd seen on her face when she first walked in. Graphic design translates beautifully to fashion design. It's all about composition, color theory, understanding how visual elements work together to tell a story. And more importantly, you have something to prove. You're at a point in your life where you need this to work, which means you'll work harder than anyone I could hire from Fit or Parsons. Desperation, when channeled properly, is the most powerful motivator in the world. Victoria had been gathering herself during this exchange, and now she exploded. "This is insane. You can't just hand my position to some random woman who walked in off the street. She has no portfolio, no experience, no understanding of the industry. This is my agency as much as yours, Elena. I've been here for 6 years. I've built the entire creative vision for Meridian, and you're going to replace me with her?" She gestured at me with barely concealed contempt. Elena's expression didn't change, but her voice got quieter, which somehow made it more intimidating. "You've been here for 6 years, Victoria, and in that time, our commercial bookings have dropped by 40%. Our clients consistently tell me that our campaigns feel cold and elitist, that they don't connect with their target demographics. Just last month, Pacific Northwest Retail canceled a $200,000 contract because they said our designs made their customers feel inadequate rather than inspired. You create beautiful work. Victoria, I've never disputed that, but beautiful isn't enough anymore. People want to see themselves in the clothes they buy. They want to feel represented, not aspirational. You've had 6 years to understand that, and you've failed. Please take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of people who appreciate authentic storytelling and we'd love for you to be part of it. Just click that subscribe button and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Victoria's face had gone through several shades of red and was now settling into a kind of pale fury. She grabbed her bag from beside her desk and turned to face me directly. "You're going to fail," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You're going to embarrass yourself and this entire agency, and when Elena realizes what a ridiculous mistake she's made, don't expect any sympathy from me or anyone else here. You're not a designer. You're a charity case." Then she turned and walked out of the office, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor, and I heard the main door slam a few seconds later. I was still standing in the middle of the office, trying to process everything that had just happened, when Elena moved behind Victoria's former desk and started sorting through papers. "Can you start tomorrow?" she asked, as casually as if she was offering me a job at a coffee shop rather than completely changing the trajectory of my life. "I don't even know what I would be doing," I said, and I was surprised that I sounded relatively calm despite the fact that my entire body was trembling. "I don't know how fashion design works, what the process is, how you go from an idea to an actual campaign. I'm terrified that you're making a mistake and that Victoria is right, and I'm going to fail spectacularly and publicly." Elena looked up from the papers and studied me again with those sharp, analytical eyes. "Good. If you weren't terrified, I know you didn't understand the magnitude of this opportunity. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you working when everyone else goes home, keeps you questioning your decisions so you don't make careless mistakes. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to spend the next week shadowing our senior designers, learning our systems, understanding how campaigns go from concept to execution. Then you're going to pitch me 3 ideas for our spring casual wear collection, designs that reflect real women with real lives who need clothes that work for them, not clothes that require them to change everything about themselves. You're going to fail at least twice before you succeed, and that's fine. Failure is part of the process. But I see something in you, Sarah. I know your name because I reviewed every application from today's open call before you all arrived. I see hunger and intelligence and a perspective that this industry desperately needs. So, yes, you start tomorrow, 9 in the morning, and we're going to figure this out together." That night, I sat in my nearly empty apartment, the eviction notice still on my counter next to David's goodbye note, and I tried to understand what had happened. Part of me was convinced this was all some elaborate prank, that I would show up tomorrow and find out Elena had been joking, that there was no job, that it was all just another layer of humiliation piled onto an already unbearable situation. But another part of me, a part that had been dormant for years, was starting to wake up. It was the part of me that used to stay up all night in college working on design projects, the part that used to feel genuine excitement about creating something beautiful and meaningful, the part that David had slowly suffocated by making me believe my only value was in supporting his dreams. I started the next morning at Meridian Models at exactly 9, and Elena was waiting for me in the main studio with coffee and a stack of design portfolios from previous campaigns. She spent the first hour explaining the business side of fashion design, how campaigns were pitched to clients, how budgets worked, how you balanced creative vision with commercial viability. Then she introduced me to the design team, 3 younger designers who had been working under Victoria and who looked at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Elena made it clear that I was their supervisor now, but she also made it clear that I was expected to learn from them, to ask questions, to admit when I didn't understand something rather than pretending expertise I didn't have. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support is what keeps this channel going. Just one click on that subscribe button makes all the difference. The first week was overwhelming in ways I can't adequately describe. I was learning a new vocabulary, a new way of thinking about visual composition, a new understanding of fabrics and cuts, and how clothes moved on actual human bodies. The design team was professional but distant, clearly waiting to see if I would crash and burn before they invested any emotional energy in training me. But Elena was there every day, reviewing my sketches, offering feedback that was honest but never cruel, pushing me to think beyond the safe conventional choices and take creative risks. By the end of the second week, I had developed 3 concepts for the spring casual wear collection. The first was immediately rejected. Elena said it was too derivative, too obviously influenced by what other brands were doing. The second was better but still not quite right. It had interesting ideas but lacked cohesion. The third concept, though, the third one made Elena smile. It was a collection built around the idea of transition, clothes that could take a woman from work to picking up kids from school to dinner with friends without requiring a complete outfit change. The designs emphasized comfort without sacrificing style, practical pockets, adjustable elements, fabrics that didn't wrinkle or stain easily. It was fashion designed for actual human lives rather than Instagram photo shoots. Elena presented the concept to our biggest client, Pacific Northwest Retail, the same company that had canceled their contract with us 3 months earlier. I wasn't in the meeting. I was too new, too unproven, but Elena told me later that the client's response was immediate and enthusiastic. They didn't just want the spring collection, they wanted to expand our contract to cover their entire casual wear line for the next year. It was the biggest deal Meridian had closed in 5 years. The success of that first campaign changed everything. The design team started treating me less like an interloper and more like an actual colleague. Elena gave me more autonomy, trusting me to make creative decisions without constant supervision. And slowly, very slowly, I started to feel like maybe I wasn't a complete fraud. Maybe I actually had something valuable to contribute. 3 months after I started at Meridian, I was working late in the studio, finalizing designs for a summer campaign, when my phone rang. It was David. I stared at his name on the screen for probably 30 seconds before I answered, and my first thought was that something terrible must have happened for him to be calling me after disappearing so completely from my life. "Sarah," he said, and his voice sounded strained, uncertain. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere?" I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my new apartment. I'd moved out of the place we'd shared together once I started getting paychecks from Meridian, and when I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. David had always been the kind of man who prided himself on his appearance, expensive haircuts, designer clothes, everything carefully curated to project success. But the man sitting at the corner table looked diminished somehow, his clothes wrinkled, his hair too long, dark circles under his eyes. We ordered coffee and sat across from each other, and the silence was excruciating until David finally spoke. "Melissa left me," he said, and there was something almost pathetic in how he said it, like he was confessing a shameful secret. "She found someone else, someone younger, someone with more money. She said I was too old, too boring, that I had too much baggage. The irony isn't lost on me, Sarah. Everything I said to you, every reason I gave for leaving, she said the same things to me." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me felt a savage satisfaction, a sense of karmic justice that David had experienced exactly what he'd put me through. But another part of me just felt sad. Sad for both of us. Sad for the years we'd wasted. Sad for the people we'd hurt, including ourselves, in pursuit of something we thought would make us happy. If you're still with me on this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your subscription means we can keep creating content like this, stories about real people facing real challenges. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and we'd love your support. Just hit that subscribe button. David continued talking, telling me about how his life had fallen apart, how the firm had let him go during downsizing, how Melissa had maxed out his credit cards before leaving, how he was living in a studio apartment and working freelance just to pay rent. It was almost a mirror image of what I'd gone through when he left, and I realized that was probably why he'd called me. He wanted sympathy, understanding, maybe even forgiveness from the one person who knew exactly what he was experiencing. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and his eyes were wet. "I'm sorry for everything I did, for how I left, for taking the money, for making you feel like you were the problem when I was the one who had given up on us. I convinced myself that leaving was the brave thing to do, that I was pursuing happiness, but really I was just running away from the hard work of being a decent human being. Can you forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long time, watching the rain run down the coffee shop windows, listening to the ambient noise of other people's conversations. Could I forgive him? Did I even want to? Forgiveness felt like it should mean something, like it should change something, but I realized that whether I forgave David or not didn't actually matter. He wasn't part of my life anymore. He didn't have the power to hurt me or help me. He was just someone I used to know, someone who had once been important but was now just a character in a story I told about how I became who I am. I don't know if I forgive you, I said honestly. I don't know if forgiveness is even the right word for what I feel.
I'm not angry anymore, David.
For a long time I was furious and hurt and bitter, but I'm not anymore. What you did was terrible, and it could have destroyed me, but it didn't. In a weird way, you did me a favor. You forced me to rebuild my entire life, and when I rebuilt it, I built something better than what we had. I have a career I love, I have financial independence, I have a sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on anyone else validating me. I like who I am now, David. I didn't like who I was when we were together. So no, I don't forgive you, but I also don't need to. You're not important enough to me anymore to require forgiveness. The meeting was over after that. David asked if we could stay in touch, maybe try to be friends, and I told him no as gently as I could. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. We had been important to each other once, but that time was over, and trying to resurrect it would just hurt us both. 6 months after I started at Meridian Models, Elena called me into her office and told me she was promoting me to creative director, a position that had never existed at the agency before. I would oversee all campaigns, work directly with clients, have complete creative control over our brand direction. The salary was more than I'd ever imagined making, enough to not just survive, but to actually build a life, save money, plan for a future. You've exceeded every expectation I had, Elena said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. You've brought humanity back to this agency, reminded everyone here that fashion is about people, not just aesthetics. Our bookings are up 70% from last year. We've signed contracts with 3 major national retailers, and every single client mentions your name specifically when they tell me why they love working with us. You took the worst moment of your life and transformed it into something extraordinary, and I could not be more proud of what you've accomplished. That night, I went back to my apartment and looked at myself in the mirror, really looked at myself for the first time in years. I saw someone who had survived, who had taken humiliation and desperation and transformed it into strength and purpose. I saw someone who Victoria Chun had called uglier than a broom, someone my husband had abandoned, someone my own family couldn't help, and I saw someone who had built a life anyway, who had refused to let other people's cruelty or circumstances define her worth. Please, if you've made it this far in the story, take a moment to subscribe. We're building something special here, a community of people who believe in the power of resilience and transformation. Your subscription brings us one step closer to 1,000 subscribers, and it means everything to us. The fashion industry is not kind to people who don't fit its narrow definitions of beauty and success. Every day at Meridian, I work with models and designers who are fighting against those definitions, who are trying to create space for different bodies, different faces, different stories. The work is exhausting and often frustrating, but it matters. Every campaign we create that shows real women with real lives is a small rebellion against an industry that profits from making people feel inadequate. I still think about that moment in Victoria's office sometimes, about standing there while she laughed at me and told me I was uglier than a broom. But the memory doesn't hurt anymore. Instead, it reminds me that other people's cruelty says everything about them and nothing about me. Victoria saw me as a failure because I didn't match her narrow vision of what success looked like. She couldn't see past her own prejudices to recognize potential. That's her limitation, not mine. A year after I started at Meridian, the agency won a prestigious industry award for our inclusive advertising campaigns, and I was invited to give a speech at the awards ceremony. I stood on stage in front of hundreds of fashion industry professionals, wearing a dress I had designed myself, and I told them the story of how I came to be there. I told them about David leaving, about my family's inability to help, about the desperation that drove me to that open casting call. I told them about Victoria's cruelty and Elena's unexpected faith in me. And I told them that the fashion industry would never change as long as it continued to measure worth by conventional beauty standards and financial success. The speech was controversial. Some people applauded. Others thought I was being inappropriately political, and a few industry veterans told me I was naive and idealistic. But the next day, I received over 200 emails from people sharing their own stories of rejection and perseverance, thanking me for speaking honestly about the industry's problems, telling me that my success gave them hope that they could succeed too. That's what I've learned in this journey from abandoned wife to award-winning designer. Success isn't about being the prettiest or the most talented or the most conventional. Success is about refusing to accept other people's definitions of your worth. It's about taking the moments when life breaks you down and using them as raw material to build something new. It's about understanding that sometimes the worst things that happen to you are actually preparing you for the best things that could happen to you, even though you can't see it at the time. Before we finish this story, I want to ask one more time for your subscription. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own resilience and potential, please click that subscribe button. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers and continue creating content that matters. Your support makes this possible. David occasionally sends me texts, usually late at night when I assume he's been drinking, telling me how much he regrets leaving, how he wishes we could try again, how he never appreciated what he had until it was gone. I don't respond anymore. There's nothing to say. The Sarah he knew doesn't exist anymore. She was broken and rebuilt into someone completely different, someone stronger and more certain of her own value. I've been on a few dates since the divorce was finalized, but I'm not in a hurry to find another relationship. For the first time in my adult life, I'm complete on my own. I don't need someone else to validate me or give my life meaning. That doesn't mean I'll never want a partner again, but it means that when I do choose to share my life with someone, it will be from a place of wholeness rather than need. Elena has become more than just my boss. She's become a mentor and friend, someone who saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. She told me once that she hired me not despite my desperation, but because of it, because she knew that someone who needed the job as badly as I did would work harder than anyone she could hire based on credentials alone. She was right. I've worked harder in the past year than I ever worked in my entire life, and it's been exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. The design team that was so skeptical of me when I first arrived has become my closest professional allies. They've taught me the technical skills I was missing, and I've brought perspective and vision that helps them think beyond conventional design parameters. Together, we've created campaigns that have been featured in major fashion publications, that have changed how regional retailers think about their target demographics, that have made real women feel seen and valued when they walk into stores. My relationship with my family has improved too, not because their financial situation has changed, but because I'm no longer the family member who needs help. For years, I think they saw me as the cautionary tale, the daughter who gave up her own dreams to support a man who eventually left her. Now they see me as proof that it's never too late to rebuild, that failure isn't permanent unless you let it be. My nieces ask me about my job, about what it's like to work in fashion, and I tell them that success isn't about being perfect or conforming to what other people expect. It's about finding the thing that makes you feel alive and pursuing it with everything you have. I've been thinking lately about what I would say to Victoria Chun if I ever saw her again. Part of me wants to be gracious, to thank her for the cruelty that ultimately motivated me to prove her wrong. But the more honest part of me knows that her cruelty wasn't a gift. It was just cruelty, and I don't know her gratitude for being terrible to me. What happened after she left had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with Elena's vision and my own willingness to work harder than I'd ever worked before. Victoria's role in my story is simple. She was an obstacle I overcame, nothing more. The fashion industry is slowly changing, becoming more inclusive, more representative of actual human diversity. There's still tremendous resistance from people who profit from the old systems, who believe that aspirational marketing requires making customers feel inadequate. But I've seen the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. Campaigns that feature diverse body types, different races, different ages, consistently outperform conventional campaigns. People want to see themselves in the clothes they buy. They want to feel like the brands they support actually value them as they are, not as they could be if they just tried harder or spent more money. One more time before we end, please subscribe to the channel. We're so grateful for everyone who has listened to this story, and we want to keep creating content that inspires and resonates with you. Click that subscribe button and help us build a community of people who believe in resilience, transformation, and the power of refusing to give up. My life now is not perfect, and I don't pretend it is. I work too much. I still have moments of anxiety when I remember how close I came to complete financial collapse. I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night convinced that everything I've built will disappear. But those moments are becoming less frequent, and when they come, I can remind myself of everything I've survived, everything I've accomplished, every person who said I couldn't succeed, and how thoroughly I've proved them wrong. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this: your worst moments don't define you unless you let them. The moment when David left, when I stood in our kitchen holding that note and feeling like my entire world had ended, that could have been the end of my story. The moment when Victoria Chun humiliated me in front of a room full of people, told me I was uglier than a broom, that could have been the moment I gave up and accepted that maybe she was right. But those weren't endings. They were beginnings disguised as disasters. They were the moments when I had to choose between accepting defeat or fighting for something better. I chose to fight, not because I was particularly brave or strong, but because the alternative was unacceptable. And in fighting, I discovered capabilities I didn't know I had, strengths I'd never needed to develop when my life was comfortable and predictable. The best version of myself was created in crisis, forged in desperation and doubt, and the absolute necessity of succeeding because failure meant losing everything. So when people tell me I'm lucky, that I fell into an amazing opportunity, I smile and nod because arguing is pointless. But luck had very little to do with it. I showed up when I had every reason to stay home. I kept working when everyone expected me to fail. I refused to accept other people's definitions of my limitations. That's not luck. That's survival transformed into success through sheer stubborn determination. My story isn't finished. I'm only 33 years old, and I have decades ahead of me to continue building, creating, pushing boundaries in an industry that desperately needs to change. There will be more obstacles, more people who underestimate me, more moments when I doubt myself. But I know now that I can survive those moments, that I can transform them into fuel for continued growth. Last month, I ran into someone from that original open casting call, one of the impossibly beautiful young women who had been sitting in the studio when Victoria humiliated me. She recognized me immediately and came over to introduce herself at an industry event. Her name was Jessica, and she told me she'd never forgotten that day, how she'd watched Victoria destroy me and then watched Elena promote me minutes later. She said it had fundamentally changed how she thought about the fashion industry and her place in it. She'd been so focused on maintaining her physical appearance, so terrified of aging or gaining weight or losing the genetic lottery advantage she'd been born with, that she'd never considered developing actual skills or creative vision. Watching my trajectory, seeing someone succeed based on perspective and work ethic rather than conventional beauty, had inspired her to go back to school for fashion merchandising. She's now working as a buyer for a major department store chain, and she told me she uses the principles I've championed in my campaigns when making purchasing decisions for her company. That conversation meant more to me than any award or professional recognition ever could. It confirmed that what I'm doing matters beyond just my own success, that by refusing to accept the industry's narrow definitions, I'm helping create space for other people to succeed in different ways too. Elena announced last week that she's planning to semi-retire in the next few years, and she wants me to take over as full director of Meridian Models. It's terrifying and exciting in equal measure. The agency that once represented everything I wasn't, everything I could never be, will be mine to shape and lead. I've already started thinking about the changes I want to make, how we can expand our inclusive mission, how we can mentor young designers who don't fit the traditional fashion industry mold, how we can use our platform to challenge the systems that keep so many talented people excluded. I went back to Ohio last month to visit my family for the first time since I started at Meridian. My parents barely recognized me when I got off the plane. Not because I look dramatically different physically, though I dress better now and carry myself with more confidence, but because I radiate a kind of certainty that I never had before. My father, who had always seemed disappointed that I'd given up my career to follow David around, told me he was proud of me. My mother cried and held my hands and told me she'd been so worried during those weeks after David left, so afraid that I wouldn't recover. My sister Rachel, who's still struggling with her student loans and her new veterinary practice, asked me for advice on how to market herself, how to build a brand, how to stand out in a competitive field. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like an equal in my own family rather than a cautionary tale or a burden. The divorce from David was finalized 8 months ago, and it was the easiest legal proceeding I've ever been through. He didn't contest anything, didn't ask for support, or try to claim any part of what I'd built since he left. His lawyer told my lawyer that David felt terrible about how everything had happened and just wanted it to be over as quickly and painlessly as possible. I appreciated that, even though it didn't change anything. The man I married had been gone long before he physically left, slowly eroded by years of mutual resentment and unfulfilled expectations. The divorce just made official what had been true for a long time. I've started speaking at design schools and community colleges, telling my story to students who are trying to figure out their own paths. I always emphasize the same points. Credentials matter less than perspective. Failure is a temporary state unless you decide it's permanent, and the people who tell you you're not good enough are usually just protecting their own insecurities. Some students look inspired, others look skeptical, and I understand both reactions. When you're young and just starting out, it's hard to believe that someone who walked into a modeling agency with no experience could become creative director within a year. It sounds like a fairy tale, like something that only happens in movies or motivational Instagram posts. But I make sure to tell them the parts that aren't glamorous. The nights I cried in my car because I was sure I was going to fail, the times I made catastrophic design mistakes that cost the agency money and nearly got me fired, the constant anxiety that someone would expose me as a fraud who didn't deserve to be there. Success isn't a straight line from humiliation to triumph. It's a messy, chaotic process of failing and learning and trying again, and the only difference between people who succeed and people who don't is that successful people refuse to stop trying. Please, before we wrap up this story, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. We're building something meaningful here, and your subscription helps us continue creating content that tells real stories about real resilience. Just click that subscribe button and join our community as we work toward 1,000 subscribers. I saw Victoria Chun about 6 months after she left Meridian. I was at a fashion industry mixer, the kind of networking event where everyone is simultaneously trying to impress each other and figure out who's worth talking to, and she was across the room talking to a small group of people. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw something in her expression that might have been regret or embarrassment or just discomfort at seeing someone she'd treated so badly. She didn't come over to talk to me, and I didn't approach her. There was nothing to say. I'd heard through industry gossip that she was freelancing, taking on small projects, struggling to find another full-time position because her reputation for being difficult had spread through the relatively small Seattle fashion community. I could have felt satisfaction at her struggles, some kind of vindictive pleasure that karma had caught up with her. But I mostly just felt nothing. Her cruelty had hurt me deeply in the moment, but it hadn't defined me or limited me. If anything, it had clarified my determination to prove her wrong. Holding on to anger or resentment toward her would only give her continued power over my emotional state, and she wasn't worth that energy. The campaigns I've designed for Meridian have started winning awards and being featured in fashion industry publications. Critics describe my work as refreshingly human, as fashion that respects its audience rather than condescending to them. One reviewer wrote that my designs feel like they were created by someone who actually wears clothes rather than just photographs them, which is possibly the best compliment I've ever received. Because that's exactly what I am. Someone who understands that clothes need to function in real life, that they need to make you feel confident when you're running late to a meeting or picking up groceries or having dinner with friends, not just when you're posing for carefully curated Instagram photos. The team I work with now is diverse in every sense of the word, different ages, different body types, different racial and cultural backgrounds, different perspectives on what fashion should be and who it should serve. We have designers who went to prestigious fashion schools and designers who are completely self-taught. We have people who've been in the industry for decades and people who are just starting out. And what unites us is a shared belief that fashion should empower people rather than make them feel inadequate, that beauty exists in diversity rather than conformity. I'm dating someone now, a photographer named Marcus, who I met through work. He shoots our campaigns sometimes, and what I appreciated about him from the first conversation was that he never treated me differently when he learned my story. He didn't see me as an inspiration or a victim or a charity case. He just saw me as a person, complex and flawed and interesting, someone worth getting to know beyond the dramatic narrative of my professional rise. We're taking things slowly, both of us cautious after previous relationships that ended badly, but there's a comfort with him that I never had with David. We're equals. We both have careers we love, separate identities, individual goals that don't require the other person to sacrifice or compromise. Maybe it won't last. Maybe we'll eventually realize we're not compatible long-term, but right now it feels healthy and genuine in a way my marriage never did. My financial situation has stabilized to the point where I can actually plan for the future rather than just surviving month to month. I've started saving for retirement. I've paid off the debts David left me with. I've even been able to send money to my parents to help them through the rough period after my father's layoff. That last part feels particularly meaningful, being able to reverse the roles and help the people who wanted to help me but couldn't. My mother cried when I sent the first check, told me it wasn't necessary, that parents are supposed to support their children, not the other way around. But I insisted. Being able to give back to the people who raised me, even in this small way, feels like completing a circle. The apartment I live in now is small, but it's mine, decorated with furniture I chose and art I love, and none of the compromises that come with sharing space with someone whose taste conflicts with yours. Every morning, I wake up and make coffee and look out the window at the Seattle skyline, and I feel something I haven't felt in years. Contentment. Not euphoric happiness, not the kind of joy that comes from external validation or achievement, but a quiet, steady satisfaction with who I am and the life I've built. I keep David's goodbye note in a drawer in my desk, not because I want to remember the pain, but because I want to remember how much can change in a relatively short time. That note represents the lowest point in my life, the moment when everything I'd built my identity around collapsed. But it also represents the beginning of something better, the moment when I was forced to figure out who I was without anyone else defining me. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you is also the best thing, even though you can't see it at the time. The fashion industry still has tremendous problems with exclusivity, with racism, with ageism, with prioritizing profit over people's well-being. I'm not naive enough to think that one person or one agency can fix systemic issues that have existed for decades. But I can do my small part, make my corner of the industry a little bit better, create opportunities for people who wouldn't normally get them, design campaigns that make people feel seen and valued rather than inadequate. That's not changing the world, but it's changing something, and sometimes changing something is enough. If you've listened to this entire story, thank you. Your attention and support mean everything. And please, take just one more second to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers and continue building this community of people who believe in resilience, transformation, and the power of refusing to accept defeat. Your subscription makes this work possible. Looking back now, I can see how every terrible moment was preparing me for something better. David leaving forced me to rebuild from nothing, which taught me that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. My family being unable to help taught me self-reliance, taught me that I couldn't wait for someone to rescue me, but had to rescue myself. Victoria's cruelty taught me that other people's opinions of me are irrelevant unless I give them power. And Elena's unexpected faith in me taught me that sometimes opportunities come from the most unlikely sources, that you never know who's watching or what they might see in you that you can't see in yourself. I'm not the same person who walked into Meridian Models that rainy afternoon, desperate and humiliated and convinced I was worthless. That woman was broken by circumstances and cruelty. The woman I am now is built from those broken pieces, but she's stronger, more certain, more capable. She knows what she's worth, not because anyone told her, but because she proved it to herself through months of grueling work and constant self-doubt and absolute determination to succeed. If my story proves anything, it's that your circumstances don't determine your worth. Being abandoned by your husband doesn't mean you're unlovable. Being unable to find a job doesn't mean you're incompetent. Being humiliated by someone who's supposed to evaluate your potential doesn't mean they're right about you. The only person who gets to decide what you're capable of is you, And even then, you'll probably underestimate yourself because we're all carrying around limiting beliefs that were installed by other people's prejudices and fears. The title of head designer at Meridian Models, the title Victoria held for 6 years and lost in a single afternoon, now belongs to me. And every day when I walk into that studio, I think about how easily my life could have gone differently. If I hadn't seen that flyer at Pike Place Market, if I hadn't been desperate enough to ignore my embarrassment and show up to an open casting call, if Elena hadn't walked in at exactly the right moment to witness Victoria's cruelty, if any of those variables had been different, I might still be unemployed, might have been evicted, might have ended up living in my car, or moving back to Ohio defeated and broken. But those variables aligned exactly as they needed to, not because of luck or fate or divine intervention, but because I kept showing up even when showing up was terrifying. I kept trying even when trying felt pointless. I kept moving forward even when every instinct told me to give up and accept defeat. That's what resilience really means, not bouncing back unscathed, but continuing to move forward even when you're scared and hurt and convinced you're going to fail. So yes, my husband ran off with another woman and left me with nothing. Yes, my family couldn't help despite wanting to. Yes, I was humiliated by someone who told me I was uglier than a broom. And yes, I took all of that pain and failure and rejection and transformed it into something extraordinary, into a career I love and a life I'm proud of, and a sense of self-worth that nobody can take away from me because I earned it through my own efforts. That's my story. That's how the worst moment of my life became the catalyst for the best things that ever happened to me. That's how humiliation became motivation, how desperation became determination, how failure became foundation. And if you're going through something similar right now, if you're at a point where everything feels impossible and you can't imagine how things could ever get better, please know that your story isn't finished yet. The next chapter might be the one where everything changes, but you'll never get to that chapter if you stop writing now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. And please, one final time, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers and continue sharing stories that matter. Stories about real people overcoming real obstacles. Stories that remind us all that we're stronger than we think we are. The next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their appearance or their circumstances, remember that you have no idea what they're capable of. The next time someone tries to make you feel worthless, remember that their cruelty says everything about them and nothing about you. And the next time life knocks you down so hard you're not sure you can get back up, remember that some of the most successful people in the world are the ones who were knocked down the hardest and chose to stand up anyway. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm the creative director of Meridian Models, and I'm living proof that the people who count you out are usually wrong. Your worst moment doesn't have to be your defining moment. It can be your launching point instead, the place where you decided that enough was enough, and you were going to build something better no matter what it took. That's the story of how I went from being told I was uglier than a broom to leading one of the most successful inclusive fashion agencies in the Pacific Northwest. That's the story of how abandonment became independence, how humiliation became triumph, how the end of one life became the beginning of a better one. I used TO clean the floors. Now I design the clothes that the girl my husband left me for can't afford.